Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Germinator. I'm your host, Dr. Lon Eisenstein, and I'm an assistant professor of teaching at the School of Engineering at UBC Okanagan campus in Kelowna. The Germinator, for those of you who are joining for the very first time, is a mostly bi-weekly guest seminar series. It is this year, I'm trying completely 100% virtual. In the past, I've done a different variety of in-person, hybrid, and online. This is now the third year, and I'm super excited to continue finding really interesting people to bring over and have a discussion on topics relating to entrepreneurship, innovation, commercialization, tech transfer, and everything that's in between. In a nutshell, it's mostly people that have translated some form of knowledge, mostly in technical realms like engineering, medicine, science, chemistry, and translated it into real world products, services, knowledge, movements, things that I think we all aspire to, and sometimes we just don't know how it gets started. A bit about the name. The Germinator comes from, again, this concept of germination. And for those of you who haven't encountered that, when you have a plant and the seeds will or will not sprout depending on the conditions. And some plants need germination. They need to stay dormant for a certain amount of time. They need the right conditions. They're waiting for cold temperature or humidity. And only when the conditions are right will the seed will actually sprout and become a plant and start growing. So in the world of entrepreneurship, we incubate and we accelerate, but we don't do enough on to germinate. And that's what this space is about, to celebrate the dormant time that people spend when they start having an idea until the time they feel ready and the conditions are right for them to sprout and actually take action on their idea. Before I introduce today's guest, I do want to recognize that we're now in what is internationally recognized as the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. This is marked from the first day, which is Human Rights Day, and ends with the day, the annual Remembrance Day for Violence Against Women on December 6th, which is this Friday. Being on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of Seal, Okanagan, I always like to recognize what it means in the context of being here in the Okanagan, and Indigenous communities and the Seal community as such have a very strong legacy of women leaders in the community. And when we look at the gender-based violence, it is a manifestation of patriarchy, of putting people down, putting women down from position of power, or fighting back against women, reclaiming power in society. And it's really important for us to recognize that women had power in society, they still do. And the legacy of Indigenous communities, like in the Seal case, the term Skumalt, women of great authority, was enshrined in the way the community was governed, and women had the feminine voice, the place of women to govern, to lead, to make decisions was displaced by colonialism, where a patriarchal society was imposed on a lot of the Indigenous communities, and that legacy still lingers on. So taking action starts by recognizing what is possible and really elevating that discussion to meaningful future, to bring back women to power in a way that a lot of the Indigenous communities still practice in today. My guest today is Ray Muzyka, co-founder and former CEO of BioWare, founder and CEO of Threshold Impact. Ray has a really impressive background. I'll just quickly skim through the things that I shared online, and you're more than welcome to look up. The rest of his legacy is all over the internet. It's easy to find. So he's originally trained as an MD from University of Alberta in 1992. He co-founded BioWare in the early 90s, and then after doing 2 full years of, or full-time, 2 years of full-time practice as a rural emergency and room family medicine practitioner, he scaled back to part-time so he can also focus on being CEO of BioWare, and he did that for 2 decades. Later in that time span, BioWare was purchased by Electronic Arts, which is one of the two biggest gaming companies in the world, and he became a vice president, I guess, an SVP, senior vice president in the BioWare division of Electronic Arts, and then retired from the gaming industry back in 2012. He started Threshold Impact after that, which is focused on sustainable, profitable impact investing and includes both investing, mentoring, and services to support that lens. And he has a slew of awards and recognitions. He was inducted in the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences Hall of Fame in 2011, International Game Development Association Lifetime Award, Achievement Award in 2013, the 2015 Alumni Innovation Award from the University of Alberta, his alma mater, Alberta's Business Hall of Fame of 2018, and then in the same year was inducted into the Order of Canada, and in 2021 named a Fellow of the Royal Canadian Geographic Society. Ray, it's super exciting to have you here. I'm super happy to have you in this conversation.
Thanks, Lon. Delighted to be here.
And I mean, where to start? I mean, I give you a big view of some questions I had to lead our discussion, and maybe just to kind of reference and preface. We have a wide range of people here in attendance, and I always like to give people the benefit of asking their questions as well. So it's not
totally
our conversation, but it's theirs as well. But maybe why don't we start with the beginning? And again, on the theme of the germination, you went into med school, you became a medical doctor, and knowing a bit about the story, BioWare came up throughout your medical degree training. So do you want to tell us a bit about the moment of creation of BioWare and how it fit in your arc of personal development?
Yeah, it was kind of an indirect path, but we started doing medical education software. My co-founders, Dr. Greg Zeschuk and Augustine Yip, were all the classmates in our med school. And we did a couple medical education projects because we saw a gap. We saw a need for them. So we made an acid-based physiology simulator. We programmed it, and designed it, did the art, and released it. I actually sold that to the University of Alberta, and they used it for like a decade with first-year physiology students, I think. It was a little dated by the time, by the end of that cycle, but it was, filled a gap in the need. We developed a gastroenterology patient simulator, which we sold to Janssen Ortho Pharma. And throughout that process was kind of like, we like software, we like business. We didn't really know what we were doing. We were kind of figuring it out as we went. None of us had any business training per se. Later on, Greg and I, we bought out Og, who wanted to go back to full-time medical practice. And Greg and I went and got MBAs. We learned all the stuff that we thought we were smart. We realized had been around for hundreds of years, and much smarter people than us had figured it out. But that was illuminating. But so we like business, we like software, and nobody really wanted to pay us. It was just sort of like a struggle. We called it the lunch circuit because we would go and have meetings, and then wherever we were, trying to sell stuff to some university or something, we'd end up buying ourselves lunch because it was sort of like, well, I guess that's another wasted trip. Nobody wants us to make this stuff at that point, anyways. So literally one day at lunch, without any preamble or preconception, for at least not for me, I think one of us suggested, well, why don't we make video games? Because Greg and I are both passionate. It was Greg and I at lunch, passionate consumers, players, fans of video games as an art form, as an entertainment form. And we joked between us, we had played every game made in the 80s and 90s and across lots of different platforms. We said, how hard could it be? It was really hard, as it turns out, but we didn't know that, which was probably good in retrospect. And literally we had practiced for the better part of 2 years full time as myself as a rural ER doc. Greg did locums, I think, in family practice clinics and some geriatric stuff, urban. And so we just took everything we owned and started hiring people. We partnered with a contractor who was developing his cool engine that became the foundation for Shattered Steel. With a subcontract called Pyrotech, we started hiring employees, and we started hiring employees shortly after that for our first fully internally developed game, Baldur's Gate. And we didn't put a lot of thought into it, So I guess maybe it was subconscious kind of germination with the medical education and just realizing we kind of like this stuff. We found it's fueling a passion for us, the software and the business. But the third passion was also, the linking it to the video game side. And then later in my third career chapter, I found a return to medical practice in an indirect way through investing and partnering with deep tech, a lot of deep tech health and med tech entrepreneurs and biotech and pharma.
Now you're back to investing in companies that are trying to do what you did, which is breakthrough.
Deep tech with impact. So, a lot of social entrepreneurs, and I gravitated towards medicine. Probably that's like 80-90% of the focus for me, but I also dabble a little bit in fintech and ag tech, and climate tech and clean tech is probably the second biggest after health and med tech and biotech. I also try and invest in minority-led teams and female-led teams because I think they're underfunded and they're often scrappier and they need the support and the mentorship, and they face headwinds. So I think the more of us that are trying to focus on that and focusing on impact categories like health and agriculture and climate and finance and microfinancing, things like that, those are all important, and the world needs more of that. So I guess you could say that's my ikigai. I found what you can be good at, what you can be paid for, what the world needs, what you're passionate about. And I think I found that I've been lucky to find it twice in BioWare, and then again in my third career chapter in Threshold Impact.
So if you don't mind, I'm gonna kind of roll back the time and kind of go back to the idea of ikigai and what you said about finding what you can get paid for. And before you said, you're trying to shop around, different simulation software or different, health related software games.
Yeah. Well, yeah, not games at that point. There was never really a true overlap of the games and the medical education. I think we tried to make the medical education entertaining, so maybe there was an overlap that I wasn't really thinking about, but it was like a clean transition to stop the medical education stuff and start the madness with making video games.
So the video games, you mean, again, this is a pure entertainment.
Yeah.
But then the medical
We
software.
made role-playing games, so games rich in story and character, and they have moral choices and kind of consequences of your actions. And they've always been an interesting game form for me because they include progression and customization, exploration, and conflict and combat and story. And when you have multiplayer or even games that have community, there's often a social aspect as well.
Yeah. I'm trying to think back which games did I play that were like that in the 80s, but I think I was just playing around in chat rooms with people, but not really.
Yeah, MUDs multi-user dungeons were sort of the progenitor of massively multiplayer online games. So Greg was more into those than me, but we both played them a little bit, and also MMOs and a lot of the classic, the gold box games and Betrayal at Condor and System Shock and Wizardry and the Ultima series and on and on. There's so many great games in that golden era, the first golden era of many actually in that world. Now I get to play it as a fan, so kind of it's flipped again. The hobbies become the career, and the careers become or the other way around. The hobby became the career became the hobby became the career became the hobby. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay. So going back to the early days, back in the 80s, where we all dressed better than we are today, and we had better music. I would argue, I'm willing to die on that hill. We had better music in the 80s. So you were developing medical software for med schools, essentially, right? To kind of simulate, or not just, but
yeah, no, that was initially our focus. We only developed two projects. We only started two projects, so yeah, they were both medical education software.
So I guess what I'm curious about, and this is kind of where
the GI one got given out to all the family docs across Canada. So yeah, it wasn't just for universities. That was actually Janssen Ortho gave it out along with recommendations to probably prescribe their GI drugs and that. But they used it as an educational tool to kind of get at the foot in the door probably with family docs.
So I guess what I'm still kind of left wondering, and this is where I see a lot of entrepreneurs when they start off, is you created something, and now you're trying to get somebody to pay for it. And maybe I have two questions, and it can go in either way. So one question is from a business strategy perspective. It sounds like that you developed it yourself. Is that right? So I see a lot of, especially in software, I see people come up with ideas and say, well, I have an idea, but I can't do it myself. So I need money so I can pay somebody to do it for me. And then I'll have something, and then I can shop it around and sell it.
Yeah, I think you could say we bootstrapped it with our own time. And
Okay.
I think we committed a classic founder error of kind of building something without clear understanding of who's the customer is. And, you know, that's a common problem I see all the time in the creative destruction lab with scientist founders. Well, it's very well intentioned, really smart, passionate people. And then a lot of the mentorship is around customer discovery, that early phase of marketing, which I think is the most important. It's like the iceberg under the surface you don't see, where you're kind of discovering what the needs of your customers are and really figuring out who's going to pay for it and why will they love it, who are the early adopters, who are the later adopters, and why. Then the sexy stuff of marketing is sort of the ads and the stuff that comes later that's informed by this, the mass of stuff that you learn, and if you're doing it right in the early customer discovery phase. So we didn't do
Mhm.
that. Luckily, I think we were kind of in conversation with both customers at the same time. We were working with a gastroenterologist who had a connection with Janssen Ortho for the GI simulator, and we were in conversations with probably the head of medical education at our faculty of medicine at the U of A for the acid-base physiology simulator. So we were kind of doing it, but not not in a conscious way, more just as we happened to be doing it, and it felt like, oh, we're learning what we need to build from that. But really, it was customer discovery.
You're basically doing it intuitively without being told this is what you should be doing.
Yeah, and I guess we were, the founder market fit concept applies here because we were sort of the target audience in a way. We were
Mhm.
like, we see a gap in a complex subject. Acid-base balance was kind of a tricky subject for a lot of the med students. So we're like, yeah, it's hard to explain, but maybe an example, like providing examples that they could work through different problem sets, and then having, here's the learning that here's this how it works. Bicarbonate does this, acid does this, and so on. Here's how the kidneys work, the lungs work, and so it all fits together, systems and so on. So we were like, yeah, we see a gap, and it was kind of the gap that we had. So we were kind of almost doing it for ourselves as the potential audience. And then the GI patient simulator was similar. It's like, yeah, we were learning how to be diagnosticians, and the kind of I think we were in or probably internship at that point or residency, I forget, but we were still in training, but we were sort of like learning it. And oh, it'd be neat if you could have a program that would kind of show you how to conduct a really efficient history and physical, and then kind of move from there to choosing the right tests, and then going from there to differential diagnosis and so on. So it was, kind of informed by our knowledge being medical students or newly minted doctors ourselves.
So maybe that's a good segue for my second question that I was gonna lead to, which is, what were you thinking? You're a full-time medical doctor, or even training, and again, med school. I haven't gone through med school, so I can't tell, but tell me if I'm wrong. It's extremely stressful and intensive.
Yeah.
And then you do this on the side.
Yeah. It's interesting because we sort of had this, I think you're trained, at least back then, you were kind of trained to not really have an endpoint for how much work everything was work, sort of like it's not a healthy, balanced lifestyle. So I encourage folks to actually like book time for personal stuff now, family and life and working out and eating properly. If you don't book it, it won't happen. But back then it was sort of like all in on this. So it was almost like, yeah, well, we're just doing this as a side project, but we're all in on it. And when the medicine became kind of part-time, I was fortunate, and so was Greg, because both of us were doing locums. I was doing locum tenens, which means temporary replacement in Latin, in rural settings for ER. So it was very easy. I had privileges at 20 hospitals, so I could just pick up the phone and say, hey, I'd like to do a shift this weekend or next week. And by the time I get to that city, northern Alberta mostly, the doc had left town, it was on vacation, and I was the only doc for like a 100-mile radius or 10,000 patient catchment area. So it was easy to find work. And so, I don't think that would have been the case if I had happened to choose a different path. Um, like if I was in internal medicine or surgery, then I'd be on call and really probably wouldn't have that flexibility. But I could kind of dial up or dial down. And I didn't look at medicine as a backup. It's weird. People ask me, well, you always had that as a reserve if your business failed. It didn't. I know this sounds stupid, but it never crossed my mind that my business would fail, if that makes sense. Like it wasn't something I was thinking about. I was just all in on it, and it was just going to make it work. So I guess the reality was I probably subconsciously knew that I could go back and do medicine, and we didn't pay ourselves a salary for 5 years. So we plowed everything we made back in the company. I'd be looking at my bank statement. I'm like, holy crow, I'm technically bankrupt. And if I don't go work this week, I can't pay my mortgage and my maxed out line of credit and my credit cards that are maxed out next month. And I better phone somebody and get some locum work, because we're not taking a salary yet from BioWare, because everything was going into hiring more people and growing. And yeah, so, but it really didn't cross my mind to the failure was an option. It was just, we're going to make it work. I don't know why I thought that, but
Do you have any recollection of what was so enticing about the idea of building, and like you said, a solution for yourself, an ed tech solution for medical students? I
well,
mean, what?
scratched an itch in that both Greg and I were passionate about technology and computers, self-taught programmers, and we saw a gap. So I think we had some of those elements of that ikigai concept I was talking about. We weren't really passionate about medical education software per se, but we were passionate about medicine, so because that's what we went into. So it sort of fulfilled that as well. But just felt like there was a need, and it just felt like it would be fun to build it. And we did enough customer discovery to be dangerous, I guess, and found paying customers for a couple projects, and learned that this wasn't quite the focus we wanted. And that's where the video game concept came from, and luckily that worked out as well. We had a minor hit with our first game, Shattered Steel, and then a big hit with the second one, Baldur's Gate, which I'm thrilled to see. It's still that franchise which we created, the world that that's set in, is still flourishing today with a new developer.
Pretty cool. I'm gonna pause here and see if anybody else wants to ask any question about, I guess, the kind of the early days, before I have a few more questions before maybe we can transition to the later part of your journey.
Yeah.
Is anybody in the audience would like to ask? Hi, Usama. If you want to
Yeah,
unmute.
yeah, I have one question, Ray. Thank you for sharing the journey. I have one question, like, can you share what your like day in a life look like when you are balancing your residency, your like family, your like health and everything? Can you share like what if like now today if you want to like create your ideal day in which you are all like productive and creative and like connecting with customers and balancing everything, what
Yeah.
that would look like?
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of the reason I eventually left medicine, I had a license until 2019. I just kept paying for it and doing the minimum requirements to keep it licensed. I didn't practice after 2001 though. But part of the reason I retired after 2001 or 2002 was that's when I got married around that period. So my wife kind of said, you're doing this BioWare, like, I don't know, like 80, 90, 100 hours a week, and some weeks. And I was doing an MBA, executive MBA around then too, which was, probably 20 hours into that, overlapping a lot of BioWare projects. I tried to do every one I could with my small group on my company. And she said, something's got to give, and it's not me. So it's like, so I stopped doing medical practice, which I was doing more for fun at that point, just once every few months. And it actually was interesting because the adrenaline turned from excitement and adventure, I'm seeing something really interesting I haven't seen in a while, to fear. After I didn't make any mistakes that I'm aware of, but I felt it was good to retire from rural ER practice, which was kind of what I was most interested in, just for that reason, if nothing else. But yeah, it was a hard balance. I don't have a great, I can't say that I was a good exemplar of work-life balance, because I was all work for many years, actually, for most of my time at BioWare. So I think I've learned in my later years that it's important to have balance, and you kind of have to book time for it. And yeah, that's probably the best advice I can give, is actually try and put it in your calendar to work out, to spend time with your loved ones, to, do it, to schedule it so it actually happens. And, then the work is going to fill up most of the rest of the time for an entrepreneur. It can be all consuming at times, but you have to kind of force that balance. Yeah, medical school is tough. It's kind of almost like boot camp, or at least it was. They've got theoretical, I think, more than anything, hour restrictions on training and time spent, but I think a lot of that probably doesn't necessarily occur unfortunately. But back then there were no such restrictions. So it'd be just like, it was just, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, your preceptor told you to do something, you went and did it, and it doesn't matter how long you've been working or how tired you are. So for me, that was sort of it helped, I guess, in the entrepreneurial world, because I was used to working incredibly long hours for the prior 8 years or more. So.
Thank you for answering it.
Lakshay, I see you have your hand raised.
Hello, thank you, Lon. Hi, everyone. Firstly, I just wanted to thank Ray for being part of this series. I've been following it for a bit. I'm a recent grad from UBC Okanagan, and I also had the opportunity to hear your story, Ray, at the Okanagan Angel Summit.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and since then I did connect with you. So glad to get the opportunity to ask you some more questions. I'll get back into my question. So, since my high school time, I've had a bit of an entrepreneurial mindset, and the way I used to think about entrepreneurship was that I need to come up with something that is very, which is a scientific breakthrough, or which is a research marvel, in order to create a business out of it. The more I've tried to spend time creating something, the more I've realized that it is more important to understand what the customer fit is, what the market needs are, and you can have the best idea on the plan, but it can fail if people don't really need it at that moment. And I wanted to ask you, what are the best ways for people like us, where we really want to dive into something, understand the industry trends, apart from just researching online about industry and crunching numbers, what are the best tools that we can leverage in order to understand what are the market needs, what are the customer requirements as well, before we step into creating the product?
Yeah, well, I think you can look at it from an internal perspective and an external perspective, potentially. The internal perspective being a team, a balanced, cohesive team that all have different skills. Some of those might be managerial skills or leadership and vision communication skills, ability to translate the customer needs. Some might be technical skills or technological skills or scientific skills. And a good team is going to have a balance of those things, and ideally some kind of founder market fit, a passion for a market, so that they're willing to really invest a lot of time understanding it, or past experience working with that market, so that they understand the customers somewhat. It doesn't obviate the need to do discovery and research and marketing, that early phase of marketing I was talking about. But it makes it easier, because it allows you to have better intuition about what kind of things to ask. And some other skills in that mix are business skills, of course, too. So, having a scientific co-founder with business skills would be a good partnership. That's a common kind of team in CDL, where a lot of, actually, it's interesting. Some teams actually form a scientific founders. MBA student joins them, because there's a proactive program at all the CDL streams across the world. And I've seen, actually, even ones I've invested in, some of those MBA students join the team as, a co-founder, which is a great way to kind of fill that. There's a program called, was it a Founder First? It's actually a global program where they actually try and create teams of complementary skills as well. So that's sort of the internal, and you can complement that internal view with great advisory groups, scientific advisory board, a business advisory board, a board of directors that has industry experience, when you're at the stage where you can bring those folks on, consultants as well. Try before you buy, before you hire them full time. And then the external side is actually do the hard work, pound the pavement, meet the customers, go to conferences, lean approach, not trying to burn money for the sake of burning money, but all purposeful learning, and trying to ask good questions of early customers, so that you can understand who needs what you're building and what do they need exactly. I had an interesting conversation with one of my portfolio companies. He's had 2 ventures. One failed. They both went through CDL in Vancouver. I didn't invest in the first one. He didn't have a paying customer for it, and there was no clarity on that path to market. But he had the great insight And I've invested multiple times now in that company. They just closed a fairly good round and invested in that as well. So, they're tracking well. But his insight was, I'm going to flip it. I've got this great technology, and he's a scientist and he knows how to build that. But before he built the next product, which was actually kind of similar to the first one, actually, he actually did the customer research and he built the product that was needed. And it was deep. That was his whole CDL journey the second time. He graduated 9 months later. And by the time he graduated, he had great clarity over the market that needed this product. And now they're building it. So, and they have extension markets as well beyond the first one. So it's a pretty cool story.
Right. Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Oh, and
especially the
I'll
bigger
add too,
picture.
there's tons of external resources that are kind of more passive that you can take on. Like you can go and do an exec MBA like I did, or you can bring on people on your team that have that. But there's great business books out there. I've got a recommended reading list on my website, Threshold Impact. It's like 75 to 100 books out of, maybe the top 5% or less of the business books I've read, and kind of organized by category, marketing, leadership, and analytics, and HR, and growth, and kind of vision, and in different categories. So, take advantage of all the resources out there. When Greg and I founded BioWare, we had this running argument. We would flip it. One of us would argue for departments, one of us argue for teams, and then one day, like I think we were sitting in a room and we just had this kind of looked at each other. We had this epiphany. Whoa, that's a matrix. So we thought we had invented the matrix organization. And then when we did our MBAs, we realized that's been around for like hundreds of years. And, there's best practices, kind of clarity on your day-to-day responsibilities, clarity on your career responsibilities, stuff like that. So take advantage of the resources that are out there. Social media, there's lots of VCs that post great blogs on different categories of things. And I subscribe to a whole bunch of different news signs as well with sort of industry news. Actively participating, learning from the people who are smarter than me, all of them, in the mentorship programs I take part in. So I'm an active learner. That's another passion for me, is sort of lifelong learning. I think I learned that from medicine, is that you can't stay static. You have to always be learning and growing, because the world around you is changing, and take advantage of every resource and be hungry, soak it up.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful, especially the bigger picture of having different team setups that can help you all throughout the way. Yeah, thanks a lot for that answer, Ray.
Thanks for the question. I see there's one in the chat asking, what was the learning process like in new fields? How did you avoid burnout? Or maybe you didn't.
Well, I kind of burned out a little later when I was at EA, about 4 to 5 years in. But it wasn't because it was actually because I didn't want to be part of a public company anymore. Like, I actually really enjoyed the first few years there, because I was learning, and it was sort of interesting to see the systems and structures and processes you have to do to be effective I was running one of 4 divisions of EA. And by the 4th or 5th year, I just got tired of the quarterly earning grind. So, I realized it was a great experience for me, especially as an investor now and a mentor, to know what it's like to be acquired by, or to go public, probably to set up the systems you have to do as a company. I can counsel folks on what that's like to go from private to public, but I don't want to be an operator in that space myself. So like I like the early stage stuff. It's more interesting, and there's more open landscape to pursue different things. Less constraints in some ways, but they're both good in different ways. I think it's just what you're personally aligned with.
Yeah.
But in the early days, no, I didn't burn out. I was fueled with passion I just loved the industry. I loved my team. I learned every day from them. I just loved working with them. It was when I retired, I had kind of 2 holes in my soul. One was business related, so I get that fulfilled by doing mentorship and angel investing. And the other one is art and design. So I do that through photography. So my wife and I go on trips every few months, and I bring 60 pounds of camera gear. Well, my knees don't hold it anymore, but I used to bring 60 pounds of camera gear. Now I bring probably 30. And, just multiple bodies and cameras, wildlife and street photography and landscapes, and you name it. The only problem with it is you can't do both at the same time, which is what I used to do at BioWare. I used to go from a business meeting to a design meeting and go play one of our games, and then it'd be like back and forth seamlessly all day long. So I enjoyed that.
Can I kind of tie this back to something that you just said about loving, having the internal passion and motivation, and also being surrounded with people that you love being with. One good advice I heard, and I pass it on to students and anybody who asks me about advice, is that how important it is to surround yourself with the people that you want to be with at the worst time, as opposed to the best times.
Yeah.
Because in the best times, people will just, it's easy to be nice when you're in good times, but it's challenging when it's bad times.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on your experience that reflects that from
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, life's too short to work with assholes. So you gotta find people that are gonna have your back, and you want to have their back when the things get tough. We set up core values for the company, and they were hard because the thing that was hard about them is that they only really applied when things got difficult, when shit hit the fan, as it were. Like the 3 core values were for our 3 core stakeholders: employees, investors, which is all of us. We didn't have any investors. It was just our employees. Every employee had options or shares in BioWare. So we thought of those as our shareholder investors, and ourselves, of course, and our customers. So those are the 3 equally important, like the 3 stakeholder framework. And the core values for them were quality in our workplace for our employees, trying to create a career opportunity for them, not just a job, but something they would love and they feel like they can progress and grow and get paid more and take on new responsibilities. And we had level systems. We had, we created new studios for them so they could become leaders of those studios or new projects. And we had very low attrition rate, I think, because we tried to create a good workplace. Our customers, we tried to create, deliver, and evolve the most emotionally engaging games in the world, was our vision statement while I was there. It's changed since then. They've evolved it even further, which is great. But each word was carefully imbued, was chosen, to be imbued with meaning, and we could explain what each of those meant, like evolve, experiences, kind of communities and social networks, and building out, landscapes and worlds and frameworks and IP that would expand and grow. And building on the prior game systems, so the characters and animations and story and moral choices and dialogue and everything would kind of continually get better each game. And then entrepreneurship for our investors, our shareholders, ourselves initially, and then later we had one external shareholder, an investor, private equity fund, and Elevation Partners. That was 2.5 years before we got an offer we couldn't refuse from EA. But each of those core values was in conflict in some ways. If you think about, trying to make the best entrepreneurial decisions to create value for shareholders would compromise quality of life and work-life balance for our employees. And it might result in releasing a product that was not, that maybe short-term would deliver better results, but long-term might compromise your value. So we created a work-life balance policy. And I tried, as CEO, to balance these core values against each other. But really, the only time that they became relevant, it wasn't like a card in a wallet or something you pull out. It was like, people are storming my office and saying, I got to go home because my kid needs me and I can't stay late tonight. And I'm like, yeah. So it's like, and we got to get the product out at the same time, and it has to be really good, and it has to sell to make, to allow us to continue to have a sustainable business. So yeah, it was challenging, but that was sort of the fun part too. Challenging, fun in that when you solved it, it was extremely satisfying, but it was hard. It was really hard to go through it each time, but very rewarding if you spent time on it and really worked through it. And the only way we were able to solve those problems was by working with our team and understanding the needs of our customers, and then trying to, return value to our investors, but doing all 3 simultaneously.
So question on maybe kind of looking at it from an investor mentor perspective, and since you spoke so much about how internally motivated you were and how much passion you had, for the industry, for video games, and for medicine and healthcare. Now you're seeing the next generation of entrepreneurs, and at this point we're probably multiple next generations of entrepreneurs. not all of us are equally passionate. Not all of us are equally, let's say, emotionally mature to be aware of our values and hold them true. And like you said, being,
Oh, and to be clear, we
Yeah.
weren't at the beginning either. Like at the beginning, we thought core value, I don't know, quality. Like we didn't even break it into constituent parts or really even define what it meant. It was just sort of
Yeah.
like later, it evolved over time. Like, so we continually made it better. We regarded it as sort of an ongoing project. I looked at it as an ongoing project. I love developing the business. I liked seeing it grow, and I liked seeing things break, because then I got to work with the team to fix them. Structures and systems failing meant, I could diagnose the problem almost like a medical practitioner would, and try to figure out what the differential is, and then try to figure out the solution and prescribe a treatment. I think both Greg and I applied that kind of frame to how we managed the business. So
The passion was there from the beginning.
Yeah, raw passion.
So I guess my question was, again, with respect to the passion, how important is it in the makeup of everything, right? Is it something that, and again, some people feel like they need to start something and they'll figure it out and find their passion later on. And I guess it's easier if you already know you have the passion and you say, I have to do this. But how important is it in the grand scheme of things? Is it too risky to just start something and hope to find the passion later on?
I would probably, yeah. But I mean, it's not. I get where you're coming from. I think it is possible for sure. And some people have the passion; they want to be entrepreneurs, So maybe there's validity in that you want to find something and you spend time. Entrepreneur First, I think, was the program I was thinking of earlier. That's like they match entrepreneur founders, and they actually kind of put them in a program, and they find your passion, find the project you're going to work on together that will achieve your goals of impacting the world or making a lot of money or whatever it is you're driven by. So I think understanding what you're driven by is important too. Some people are driven to learn and grow, and some people like being social, and some people like art, and some people like being part of a traditional hierarchy, and some people are more, they want to see their name in the lights. Some people want to make a lot of money. Most of us are blended, of a few of those different things, sort of as intrinsic motivators. So I think that's important too. And that's sort of the internal side of, there's probably multiple passions that people can have that will scratch that itch of your internal intrinsic motivators. So if you understand those, maybe you could approach it from the first principles and then find what it is later. And if you know what they are, you can figure out, yeah, that's actually fulfilling the need at this point. I wouldn't say we had clarity. This is our passion at the beginning. It just felt right. So maybe that is the same thing. But it was just like when we said it, we were just like, yeah, let's just do that. Like at lunch, I got the receipt still. I have this MasterCard statement and I circled it, lunch where Greg and I decided to, because I paid for it. It's like, this is where we decided to form BioWare. It's like, I've still got it in a file folder somewhere. So I don't know exactly what happened in that meeting, but I know that was the meeting because Greg said, oh yeah, that was totally the meeting. But it just felt right. And it's just like, yeah, let's just stop doing that. Let's do this. Oh, okay. It didn't feel as risky as it should have. It just felt like a grand adventure, so maybe that's sort of like, the answer when it doesn't feel like the risk is not worth it.
Yeah.
Because to be clear, entrepreneurship is hugely risky. I'm not advocating people to quit their jobs and just, jump into entrepreneurship. I think you got to go into it with eyes wide open. I was so incredibly lucky to have medicine essentially as a backstop that allowed me to do that part-time whenever I wanted. I have no illusion on that front. It wasn't planned. It wasn't, I wouldn't actually recommend that as a direct path either. Because I mean, it's a long investment of time and money to get through that. And, but it worked out, so I think the interesting thing for me is, and it always has been, of seeing how different experience sets colliding with another experience set kind of create a magical intersection. We did this at BioWare through a matrix structure. So we would have like designer programmers that could be either a programmer that liked design or a designer that learned some scripting and became a programmer. We did the same in QA and design and arts and animation and production. There was overlap, and sort of that magical intersection point was always interesting. The multi-specialist who could actually translate
Yeah.
Arguably, I'm an example of that now with the medical background and the software background and sort of the, helping to translate medical innovations in some ways, especially health tech. That's sort of a sweet spot, I guess, for me. But really any devices or software that have a user interface design or I find them really interesting. So it's always fun to think about what's the user experience going to be of this. And that's me applying my video game background, I think, as well as my medical training.
Yeah, and you describing the way you structured BioWare feels like planned happenstance. I don't know if you're familiar with the term. But it's essentially creating a structure where things just happen, right?
Yeah. I mean, we created those intersection points. Yeah. And then we realized they were stronger when you actually did it intentionally and you put someone in. You're the bridge between these two different groups on a project. This magic happened. It was just like both groups suddenly became more productive. They stopped arguing and started talking, sort of like.
Yeah, pretty cool. I saw there was a question in the chat asking about what you were just talking about, how do you financially support a startup in the early days? And I think you kind of answered how you did it, which was
we had revenue. So like the early days before we had the contracts with publishers. So we had, we had some interesting stories in the early days. We were two doctors in a northern Alberta city that had no video game experience. Nobody in the city did, actually. At that point, there was no industry, as far as I'm aware. There's quite a few now, which is really cool. There are a lot of spinouts from BioWare, actually. And then later we had locations across North America and Austin and Virginia, Montreal and San Francisco, Sacramento, LA, and also at a big ops center in Galway, Ireland, customer support and OpEx, or ops center infrastructure. But we divided the list of what we perceived were the top 10 publishers globally between us. Greg took 5, I took 5, and we prepared this really naive, in retrospect, demo and upon a business plan, and we sent it to them, and then we cold called them until they took our calls and agreed to look at the demo. And we wouldn't stop. We just kept phoning them every day, multiple times a day, until they finally took our call and finally said, "Stop calling me. I'll look at it." And then after they did, 9 out of 10 made an offer to publish the product, but it was months of just cold calling these publishers and trying to figure out who the right people were there for business development and new products. And I think one of them, I've still got it on my key. I don't have my keychain, but I'm a big fan of this series called Wizardry. So we sent it to Surtech, and I think they looked at it first, and they sent back an offer the same day, and offered to fly us down. And the last one to sign to give us an offer was Interplay, and they're the one we ended up signing with. But once they did, they flew us down the next week as well and made us an offer to work in the D&D universe. That's how Baldur's Gate 1 occurred. The only one, ironically, that didn't make an offer was our ultimate acquirer, Electronic Arts. So, and the other irony is they're the only publisher that actually survived that 20-year journey. All the other ones went out of business. So at some point along the way. So, but yeah, it's sort of an interesting path. But we had revenue. I guess that, we fueled it with our own savings for some period of time, but that doesn't sustain very long. Like, a couple doctors, a few $100,000 invested into a company. It's an angel round essentially with our own founder money, which, it's got us off the ground, got us to hire some people, buy some computers, lease an office. But after that, we were fortunate to have non-dilutive capital revenue from the beginning. So yeah, we found our customer fit quite early and sold products.
And then there's the classic 3 Fs: your friends, families, and fools, to get money from in the early days before you can actually be financially.
Yeah, we didn't raise from friends or family. The fools were us, I guess, the two of us. But we didn't have anybody in our network we didn't know any VCs or angels. There was no, the real estate investors and oil investors in Alberta at that point. And with really very nascent tech industry, like there was a few tech companies, but yeah, we didn't know anybody. We didn't know how to approach anyone who would invest in a tech business. So it's interesting too, because we were growing really fast. And I don't know if we should have grown faster or not. I don't know if we could have grown faster or not without blowing up, because like we were the fastest growing company in Alberta. We were the second fastest, I think, several times on the top 15. We were in the top 15 list, I think, every year that we applied. things are just holding together at the seams, like, like you're trying to build it as you're rolling forward on the tracks, etc. So yeah, and we didn't really know what we were doing. We hired, I think around when we had about 80 people, we hired our first sort of professional managers. From finance, we had a finance director and a HR director. Those was our first two hires. Until then, Greg and I were doing that basically ourselves, along with managing a project each. And our first 60 employees, no one had ever worked on a video game before. So we hired people from, I've got crazy stories like our designer, the lead designer, who ended up being the lead designer, a bunch of buyer projects, or co-lead designer, ended up being the first design department director and training a lot of other great luminaries in the industry who have gone on to do great things, but Bio and beyond. He was running a comic book store in Grand Prairie, a small town in northern Alberta, that was kind of not doing great, but I heard that he had a wait list for a D&D campaign. He had like 2 campaigns he was running, and he had a wait list. So I thought, oh, this guy knows how to create worlds and create compelling stories. So we drove him down, couldn't afford to fly him, but drove him down and said, want to hire you. And he's like, well, I've never played a video game before. And I'm like, you're hired. It's like, so we hired one who became our lead modeler and texture artist, and he was really a fantastic employee for the early years. He didn't like the large scale, so he ended up going to a smaller company as we grew, but he was fantastic. He was carving wooden hunting decoys, for ducks, and he would like model them in wood, and then he would paint them. And so Greg and I thought, oh, he has like 3D modeling skills, and then he has some texturing skills because he can paint them. And he had never turned on a computer before. So the first thing we did after we hired him was like, you're building your computer, and then you're learning Lightroom 3D, or whatever the project we were using at that point was, was a 3D modeling software. He's like, but I don't know how to use a computer. I'm like, you're hired. It's like, so, on and on with stories like that. But 60 people in for Baldur's Gate and Shattered Steel, no one on those 2 projects had ever worked anywhere except at BioWare on video games. So we were just trying to figure it out as we went. The programmers we hired came from database companies. They're professional programmers. And we hired artists who had graduated from Alberta College of Art or BC, the schools there, or Vancouver Film School, and so on. The animators. We had great talent, but they hadn't had that experience in the industry. So we viewed passion as sort of the more important attribute, because you can learn. If you're willing to learn and work hard, you can learn if you have the passion and the work ethic. Later, we were able to hire people with great experience as well, and that augmented our team even more. But many of those people ended up being there for the whole journey.
So considering the time, because we're getting close to 2 p.m., and I see there are a few questions in the chat, but I feel like they're very specific to the gaming industry, past and present. So maybe we'll follow up with them offline after. Just kind of in the last few minutes, and again, recognizing you had your own very rich experience, and now you're mentoring so many, and I'm fortunate to work with you on one of the mentoring teams at the VMS at UBCO.
Yeah, we had a meeting today, and we're just saying how exciting it is to see their journey. Every meeting seems like they've got a new light as they kind of build on the past foundation. They're starting to really get some interesting traction now.
So what would you say the best advice that you've ever received, and what would be the best advice you ever gave somebody?
This is not a business story, but I was a student intern, and I had the same preceptor for internal medicine from the day I graduated as a student to the day I had a medical degree. And so now I was an intern. So now I went from a student intern, doing exhaustive history, 6 pages, multiple hours spent with a patient, to becoming an intern, where I suddenly had 2 or 3 bright-eyed student interns reporting to me, expecting me to manage them. And my preceptor was the same. So I didn't realize that I had changed my role, and I didn't realize my behavior and my thinking had to change. So he pulled me aside and kind of ripped a strip off me. And it was strange, because I always thought I'm almost like a father figure, and kind of like he would treat me really nice as a student. But then he would just kind of pulled me aside and just kind of, you are not doing this right, kind of like really forceful, and you got to get efficient. You got to manage your team. You got to, like, he gave me a bunch of advice. And later I ran into an article in HBR called The Seasoned Executive's Decision-Making Style. And I've recommended that as a PDF to pretty much all my managers and their secondary reports that I would meet with every few weeks to kind of groom them, help them grow. Understanding what your internal thinking and behavior need to develop as you grow, as your team grows, as you develop as a leader. Integrative and flexible and hierarchical, and different approaches appropriate at different stages and different roles of management. So that's a long-winded way of saying you got to be aware of what you need to do to make your team successful and adapt yourself. Another way to say that is in the Good to Great book, there's this example of the bus, and there's only so many seats on the bus. And when people aren't performing the role, you got to find, help them grow and so they can stay on the bus, or you got to move them out, move someone else in. That applies to you too. If you're the leader of the company, you have to grow your skills and mindset and capabilities in order to keep ahead of, stay in the driver's seat. And if you can't, you got to step out and find someone better than you to grow and learn. Yeah. So maybe that's a bit of an answer to both things, two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And we're just coming close to the end, so I'm just going to quickly share and say, and I think, I don't know if you've met Carol, but I will just quickly say that in early January, the next guest is going to be Carol Wilder, and she is a veteran of so many of the tech industries in the US, Amazon, Dell, Intel, there's a few others I probably forget. Her bio is on the website as well. And she's currently moving into Kelowna full-time, so she'll be local to Kelowna starting the new year. And I'm having her as a guest, and she knows a lot about AI, and we're going to have a lot of interesting chats about how AI has changed the way we do everything.
Yeah, fantastic.
Ray, it's been really fabulous. We've had lots of conversations, but usually in the presence of many other people and students and mentees. So I'm grateful that we can have this conversation between the two of us and just over 24 invisible guests that were eavesdropping. And I'm going to see you later tonight at the BCO party.
I look forward to the Venture Social.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for joining us for this session, and feel free to reach out to me or Ray or both of us with more questions, and I'll keep a record of these questions in the chat and make sure Ray gets a hold of them, and hopefully he can follow up with some of these answers.
Yeah, and I have a contact email on my website as well. So yeah, thanks everybody. Great to see you all.
Great
Thanks,
job.
Ray. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Allard.
Thanks.
Bye,
Thanks
everyone.
a lot.